tardes. Oh, yes. Okay, good. This is like a call and response here. Okay, good afternoon. Come on. Good afternoon? Okay, good. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, hello, everybody. Welcome to a panel on migration. There was many of you were in the panel earlier on refugees and labor. We will cover some of the same terrain, but these are complementary panels in many ways. We are going to talk broadly about migration. We are going to be more Mexico-U.S. focused and regional generally than North America. Largely not because Canada's not here. Canada will drift into the conversation here and there, but obviously it is a bigger issue between Mexico and the United States. I'm going to just very briefly say maybe three things. One is that migration is truly, Baco, good to see you. One is that migration is one of the glues that binds Mexico and the United States together, right? The fact that there's an enormously large Mexican origin population in the US and that much of American culture is shaped by Mexico, as well as a very large American community in Mexico, and that Mexican culture is shaped by the United States, is one of the things that most closely ties us together, right? It's that thing that allows commerce to happen, that allows innovation relationships to happen, that allows relationships in cinema to happen, right? All the other things that are going on all the time. It is also, however, one of the issues that is constantly on the edge of blowing up other parts of the relationship. So here a little bit of irony, right? I mean, it is probably the deepest thing that ties us, and yet how we manage migration constantly seeps into other policy areas in the relationship, right? And seeps into the political debate. Second point is to say that the issues we're talking about are not just about Mexico and the United States. Of course, when we talk about migration, we're talking about something that is regional and global, right? People come. If we were having this conversation 20 years ago, we would have been talking about Mexicans coming to the United States, and Mexican colleagues would be saying you need to legalize them. American colleagues would be saying you need to stop them from coming, and we'd be going. That's not the debate today, right? We're now talking about yes, there are Mexicans going to the U.S. and yes, there are Americans living in Mexico, but there's also a world of people coming from everywhere on the globe, coming through Mexico, the United States, and increasingly many of them are staying in Mexico as well, right? Some of them resettled by UNHCR, others who are staying on their own. I mean, there's a lot of things going on, and we'll hear from Marian talking about actually some work that Driscoll's is doing also that brings together in a creative way Guatemala, Mexico, and the United States. So we're thinking about this as increasingly, even though we're going to talk about, we're at a conference on North Capitol Forum, we really are going to be talking about an issue that is regional and global. And finally, I mean, let me just say, migration is coming in full circle. Migration is something that we should see as an asset. Migration is it's one of the ways that humanity has evolved through, millennia. We should always see migration as an asset, but that does not mean that it is not contentious and that we don't have to figure out policy regimes that make the most sense to protect people in need, to manage flows, to figure out how to move people on legal pathways so you can match supply and demand. There are a number of issues on which we need to make decisions. So we want to be both optimistic but also clear-eyed on an issue that is deeply important to both countries, but at the same time also has edges to it that are particularly important in the other policy conversations in the relationship. So with that, let me turn it over to Dana Graber, who will talk first and foremost, the representative of the IOM in Mexico. She's going to talk about migration legal pathways, how you begin to think, which is a major issue the IOM is managing, how you create legal pathways that allow for labor mobility, that allow vulnerable people to move as well, and then specifically what IOM is doing in Mexico about this. So, Dana, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks to the U.S. Mexico Foundation for organizing all of this. We're very excited to be a part of this for the first year, co-sponsoring this event with the Migration Policy Institute. And so when we talk about regular pathways, I have to say that since yesterday, every single event and every single panel that I've attended, this topic has come up. And in fact, I'm getting a little frustrated because everybody's stealing my talking points. So I'll still try to not repeat too much, especially what the three ambassadors just shared at 2:00. So it's really exciting for us because for IOM, it's very clearly a priority because we have three global priorities. One is saving lives. 2 is seeking solutions to displacement, and 3 is promoting regular pathways. So at a global level, this is a priority, and regionally, this is a priority. In fact, a couple of months ago, we co-implemented with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Labor the first ever hemispheric meeting on regular pathways for labor migration here in Mexico. And the whole purpose of this was to identify best practices, what are gaps, what are some solutions in terms of policy and programs. So for us, this is absolutely a priority. And when we look specifically at what we're doing in Mexico, we also see this because we have quite a few activities that are related to this, whether it is promoting, advocating for more regularization for migrants here in Mexico, and we do this hand in hand with UNHCR, who is also promoting this. We also have programs on ethical recruitment for Mexican migrants to go both to the United States and to Canada. So I will bring up Canada a little bit there. We do a lot of capacity building for the private sector. And when we think about the opportunities for legal pathways, regular pathways in these 3 countries, it's really phenomenal because you see one of the panelists was mentioning at an earlier panel about an aging population. Another important topic is when we look at vacancies. So there's an estimation of 8.5 million vacancies in the United States, around 1.3 to 2 million here in Mexico, and around 600,000 vacancies in Canada. So the demand is there, the interest is there, and another activity that we have in Mexico is that we do a lot of studies and surveys with migrants themselves. And in fact, when we're surveying migrants, 19% have told us that they're interested in Mexico as a country of destination. So we do know that quite a few want to move on to the United States, some also to Canada, but more and more people want to stay here. So for us, regular pathways is essential. And so whether it is implementing job fairs that we bring together private sector partners and the migrants to the space so that we can make that connection, whether we're facilitating ethical recruitment to other countries, whether we're working on cross-border permits between Guatemala or Mexico, all of this area is absolutely a priority for us. And so I'm very excited to hear that it's coming up in every single panel.
That's great. Thank you. Dana, thank you for giving us a really good overview to start off. Teresa Cardinal-Brown, next, tell us a little bit about migration policy. Why is this such a contentious issue in the relationship and in general in the United States?
Yeah, it's just, it is what it is.
And that concludes her intervention, everybody.
That's it.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting you started out saying, if we had this conversation 20 years ago, it would be about, Mexicans saying to the United States, you need to legalize our population there, and the United States saying to Mexicans, you need to stop your folks from coming. But the other difference is that 20 years ago, the conversation was all about labor migration. There wasn't really that large a group of people coming to the border asking for protection. That was very small. It was the exception to the rule. We had a formalized refugee resettlement process that was very largely bipartisan supported and kind of off to the side. But the issues around irregular migration were all about labor migration, circularity, and people coming to work and then go back. And now the conversation is much more about, we have refugees, we have asylum seekers, we have labor migrants, we have displaced persons, mixed motivations, which is not unique. I mean, that's part of the human condition, but we have these silos of legal categories that we put people in, and it has muddied the conversation. When you have many, many migrants who come to the United States and say, well, I'd like to have asylum, when what they really probably want is a work visa, and many, many of them do not meet the legal definition of refugee. So we have now embroiled our refugee and protection and asylum system in this conversation that it would ordinarily be about labor mobility. The other thing that, and for the United States, that tradition of thinking about migration in terms of labor creates some of that dichotomy of why it's so problematic, or not problematic, why it is so contentious in the United States. Because historically, immigration has been regulated in the United States as a labor issue. Are immigrants going to work? If they're going to work, are they going to displace Americans? Are they going to hurt the wages and working conditions of Americans? So immediately our system is set up to see immigrants as competitors in the labor market. And so we regulate immigration around that. So and anytime you have the United States sees a decline in our economy or in the jobs available, yes, we have 8.3, we have a lot of open jobs. We have about 6 million unemployed people, so a gap of about 2 million and an aging population. And so all the projections are going to say we're going to need immigration. And yet, as Senator Coons said last night, there is a large group of people in the United States who feel like they are economically left out now. So how do the new arrivals intersect with what they are looking to do? So this creates foments the difficulty in the political situation in the United States for migration. The other thing is that the United States is the #1 destination that immigrants want to come to, even though an increasingly number are like, oh, Mexico's not bad, I'll stay in Mexico, that's fine. Or, we know that there are more Venezuelans in Latin America than that have come to the United States so far. But for the United States, it is always like people want to come, and so we see we need to put limits. That's how the United States looks at it. To bring our Canadian friends into it, the difference in the way we see it and the way Canada sees it is we have caps or limits on immigration, and they have targets. And that difference in how you talk about it tells you something about the way the two countries see it. I think moving forward, increasingly in the United States, this challenge of future growth, our labor force, our population, and migration is going to keep coming together. And we're going to have to find a way to get our hands around this idea that, guess what, we really do need immigration in the United States. But the political battles over it are not yet over.
And there's a highly symbolic dimension to immigration discussions in the United States that
Certainly.
Is separate from, that shapes
reality?
the policy discussions, right?
It's separate from reality.
Right, but quite separate, right? I mean, it's often a proxy for other debates we're having in the United States rather than a debate in and of itself, right? You think the conversation's about immigration policy, but it's actually around a set of other things that are happening in people's lives. And with that, Rafael Fernández de Castro is going to explain to us how this affects the U.S.-Mexico relationship. He is both one of the great scholars of the relationship, but also has done a lot of work on migration specifically. So put that together and tell us, why is this such a big issue for both countries?
Thank you, Andrew. I'm very happy to be in this panel. I recognize and admire all what you do for migration. What you publish in, Andrew, at the Migration Policy Institute is very important. And thank you, OEM, for being in the border in Ciudad Juárez, in Tijuana. You're really making a difference. Let me talk three things. First of all, I want to just let you know that this is the single most salient issue and the single most politicized issue in the bilateral relationship. That's my first point. Second, there's a new dynamic in the border the last 4 to 5 years. And what I want to tell you is not anymore about Mexico and Central America, it's the entire world coming into the US-Mexico border. I'll tell you about it. And third, it's about what I will say, the emerging efforts to manage this in a regional way, and Mexico is trying to put a human face in this very difficult problem. Number one, this is the more salient and more politicized issue in the bilateral affair. Migration, only after inflation, is the second issue in the coming U.S. election. And for a lot of people, this is the most important issue in the election. So then you're going to be listening about the Haitians eating cats and dogs and all of this, and all the crimes committed by migrants. So it's highly politicized. This is the time in history in which migration really has become so politicized and is so salient in the U.S. election. It's very much a very critical issue for Democrats and for Republicans. Here, I must say that Mexico is playing a crucial role, an essential role. And Mexico in the last year, I would say, is helping a lot the democratic cause. I would say without the AMLO's administration and now the Sheinbaum administration helping filtering all of those migrants in transit, no way Democrats could stay in the White House. I'm not telling you that they will stay in the White House, but at least we have a very different problem nowadays than last year. Last year, for example, December, we have the Border Patrol got 300,000 encounters. This is the high ever. Out of those, only 44% were from Mexico and Central America. So everybody's coming. There's a problem in Ukraine, they come. So that is the new dynamic there. And so we have to be aware that this is, again, not a Central America, not a Mexico phenomenon, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And unfortunately, this has become so politicized that yes, migration, instead of saying the US economy is booming, is the world economy who best came out of the pandemic, and in a large extent is because of these immigrants coming into the US. Nobody's talking about that, everybody's talking about, and especially Trump is a champion, and especially his advisor, Stephen Miller, to portray migrants as criminals. And he's very effective on that. So the narrative is awful, it has never been that bad, and we must recognize that. And I believe it's essentially central there. So let me now go to, yes, in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, I mean, there's this Los Angeles declaration to try to come up with some regional solutions. Yes, most of the migrants coming into the border are from the Western Hemisphere, lots of Venezuelans, lots of Haitians, lots of Ecuadorians, lots of Colombians. I mean, from every place in trouble, there's people coming. But there's people from everywhere coming, lots of Chinese, lots of, just last year, the Border Patrol encountered people or nationals for 130 nations. So it's everybody really coming there, and you know it very well. So how's Mexico managing this? And well, Mexico is very much trying to help the US with a regional management of this. López Obrador had this Palenque summit in which we invited the Latin American and Caribbean countries to help us. But I will say it's only an emerging issue. I will say one of the reasons that explain all of these people coming from everywhere are traffickers. And this is a huge, huge, huge business. It's not only drugs, and Eduardo Medina Mora, who's here, you know a lot about this. Now, I mean, this is the new gold for some criminal organizations. It's very telling, for example, I go walk to La Jolla Shores. If you've been in San Diego, this is a beautiful beach, very close from UC San Diego. And I'll, at least once a week, I'll see this boat abandoned there, in which, I mean, there's, at midnight or early in the morning, there's a boat coming with perhaps 15, 20 migrants. They abandoned the boat there, and it's impossible in the Pacific Ocean to stop all of these boats coming. So this is not something happening in the Mediterranean. This is happening just in Baja California and in California. There's a lot of these things happening. So I believe we must put an effort to try to do something against these criminal organizations because they're doing a great business. Finally, I believe the Mexican government, and Alicia Bárcena was key on that, she's trying to put a human face to what Mexico is doing. Is basically deterring migrations. I mean, it is portrayed as the carousel because they basically people coming all the way up to the northern border and they send them back to the southern border. And so we're doing that a lot. I don't believe that's sustainable. And so it will be very important to figure out ways in which we strengthen this regional effort, that we strengthen our efforts, not only to try to put a human face, but also to understand that the new dynamics is not only young men. That was the migration of the 20th century. Now, about 40% of the flow is nuclear families. It's the entire family. That has to do a lot with the immigration or the refugee system in the US. If you're a family, you cannot be detained, or if you have children, for more than 20 days. So, and to finish, I will say, in the border, basically the Mexican border cities, I mean, we've been left alone by the federal governments. This is, I would say, a multi-actor management in which we have NGOs, in which we have religious groups, in which we have, in the last 6 years, the international organizations. So I would say, Andrew, and I will finish with that, it will be very important, it will be key essential that the incoming Mexican government will empower NGOs in the border and religious groups. They really, I mean, if Tijuana is so well, I would say, equipped to receive all of these more border flows, is because of civil organizations and because now there's at least 4 or 5 international organizations, and you're making a big difference because you have the resources, but more than that, you have the know-how. You bringing the best practices of the entire world to our common border, and I believe that we really make a team and just see the management of migration in border cities as a multi-actor phenomenon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. And let me say, Rafael is also a tenured professor at UCSD. He's director of the Center for U.S.-Mexico Studies at UCSD as well, which does extraordinary work on the relationship. Teresa, I don't think I introduced you, also as senior advisor of BPC, Bipartisan Policy Center. And also, you're also a visiting fellow for the North Capitol Forum this year.
Yeah, I'm a fellow at the North Capitol Forum.
That's right. Okay, so you're doing your fellow duties here
Yes,
as well,
I'm
which
doing
is a
the
good
fellow
thing.
duties.
And Dana, you know, is the chief of mission for IOM. So great. And now, great pleasure to introduce Mariana Abril, who's going to talk about a very practical experience on creating legal pathways and mobility in North America. She is the Sustainability and Social Innovation Director at Driscoll's, and Driscoll's has really leaned into, which is a global company, primarily berry production, has really leaned into questions of mobility, particularly because the agricultural workforce is changing around the world, right? And so beginning to look very, but also with a sense of social sustainability, looking at ways that you can combine mobility pathways in new, and you guys have kind of stretched a little bit what is possible actually in mobility in the existing legal regimes that exist in 3 countries. So Marian, great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon. So I'm going to speak about the agricultural side. Agriculture is really facing a silent crisis, and we have a lot of labor shortage. So of course in the US it's really well known, but in Mexico it starts to be a problem, and we think in the next 10 years it's going year after year to be a bigger and bigger problem. And because we have this crisis, we are also putting at risk the food production. And the food production, the food is the base of life. So we really need to find a new way. So last year we had the opportunity to be in a kind of think tank with some partners, some growers, but also some NGOs like Cierto. And we were thinking on, okay, how we can prevent, we can think differently, and we can see we can anticipate in Mexico what happened to the US and how we can combine the experience of both countries. And so we went with the idea of creating a corridor from Guatemala, Mexico, and the US. And so we start last year doing a pilot project, and the idea would be to do a proof of concept, because at the end you're moving or translating people from different country, and there is different processes, different visa, different problems. And so we try to understand and to create this corridor. So the pilot project was with 40 people, 33 men and 7 women. And so we partner with Cierto in Guatemala. They help us to recruit people locally that would be able to come in Mexico. In that case, it will be in Baja California with one of growers of Driscoll's, Berrymax. And so in Guatemala, they did a strong recruitment, a lot of trainings on labor rights, on working condition, on what's going to happen in Mexico, and if they were able to go to the US, so what's going to happen in the different countries. It took us quite a lot of time, but after 6 months we were able to travel the 40 people to Baja California. After almost 4 months in Mexico, so picking strawberries in that case, learning this agricultural side, 33 people were able to go to the US. So here, one of our biggest fear our doubt was if we would be able to do all the paperwork for the H-2A visa in Mexico, being from Guatemala, because for the H-2A visa, you need to be in your country of origin. So thanks to the American Embassy in Tijuana, and because it was a pilot project, we were able to do that. And so it went smoothly. It was a very nice pilot project because at the end, I think a lot of people were really interested in how we make it work in Guatemala, in Mexico, but also in the US. So it was a lot of effort, but we had a lot of partnership with government, with NGO, with our grower. And we were able to really see where are the bottlenecks if you want to expand this kind of pathway. So now we have a big list of bottleneck, and the idea is to follow on that, not to see how we work on this bottleneck, and so it can be an experience that can be replicated with other grower or other people, and for the people from Guatemala, it was such a nice experience also because they were able to really find a way to work legally. And so avoiding all the illegal immigration, and so having, the security that you will be able to work in one country. If you are enough efficient, because there is some step, of course, you can go to the US. But having, this year-round work, you can come back to your country, be with your family, but also go to Mexico and then to the US was really, I think, the most tangible and the most best things for the worker. So it was quite exceptional to see that way that at the end a lot of people, like my colleague said, a lot of people wants to go to the US, but it's also nobody migrate because you want. Normally you migrate because you have a need. So having this possibility to really go step by step in different countries and coming back home was something very thoughtful. And so for us on the ag side, it was also amazing and really a positive project. Because we see that if we work also together with some stakeholders, there is a new way of migration, of working in North America. So we think it's something quite positive. There is a lot of work to do if we want to really open this kind of pathway, but it was really interesting from our side.
Thank you, Marian. That's great. I mean, this is a very creative approach, and I want to actually go back to Dana, Teresa, and Rafael on this. I mean, one of the challenges I think you've all raised in different ways is, at a time where labor forces are changing, demographics are changing, their labor force needs in the U.S. quite large, their labor force needs in Mexico, though they're much more regionalized and sector-specific, but they're going to grow over time. And there's still a few countries in the hemisphere that are going to have major migration pressures, either because of political instability or because of demographics, right? How do we build legal pathways that allow people to move, where people are not going and applying for asylum at the border unless they actually are seeking protection, but they also have other alternatives to get to the United States or to Mexico or to another Chile or another country or Spain, countries that have labor market needs, people who want to go for work. And, some people want to go, some people have to move permanently, especially refugees. Some people want to move permanently, particularly if they have family already. But for a lot of people, seasonal work is actually a much better option, right? I mean, so thinking of a mix, where do you see signs of light and where do you see this breaking down? I mean, could we get to a place where we actually have legal pathways in this hemisphere, with Mexico and the U.S. taking some leadership on this, and Canada, which has actually historically been quite good. Here we'll bring in Canada. Could we get, but it's less focused on the hemisphere, right? I mean, Canada is very good on legal pathways, but less focused on the hemisphere, right? They're much more focused on Asia. Could we get to a day where at least we see more of this possible and fewer people arriving at the border to try and figure out if they can get in? So whoever wants to take that, Dana?
Sure. So at the last session where Ambassadors Graham and Salazar and Moctezuma, they all talked about various temporary pathways or work visas that are available in in United States and in Canada. However, it's not enough. And we know it's not enough if you look at the figures. If you look at the figures, that the people who crossed the Darien in 2023, it's over 500,000 people who crossed the Darien between Colombia and Panama in 2023. And that was double the number that crossed in 2022. And if we look at the figures at the US-Mexican border, there were 2.4 million apprehensions in fiscal year 2022. And although the numbers are down a bit, there will be the fiscal year 2023 just ended a few days ago, so the statistics aren't out, but it will be barely over, it'll be a little over 2 million. So still 2 million apprehensions. So we know all of these people, millions of people, are moving because there are not regular pathways. And so while there are programs and policies to go from countries of origin to the United States and to Mexico, it's not sufficient. And so we really need to expand these. And also we need to become more creative because, like I mentioned, Mexico is more and more a country of destination. So how can we also harness this potential from these countries of origin to be able to come to Mexico? So that's where we see the importance of pressure on policy and trying to get over the xenophobic and racist mentalities to really see this as a solution. For us, migration is not a problem, it is a solution. And so this is why we also see this as the motor for the socioeconomic development in these countries. And it's a matter of really getting at the legislative level, individuals together to agree on expanding those regular pathways that already exist and establishing new ones. And we believe that this is definitely possible.
Okay. Teresa, is this politically possible?
Yeah, I mean, I've been struck by something at this conference, starting from like the first panel that I saw actually on Wednesday. The term labor mobility has been used so often, not just in panels led by us immigration folks, but in panels on trade, in panels on business, in panels on investment, in panels on development. Labor mobility is another word for migration. I hate to say that, but it is.
Shh, don't repeat that loudly. You're supposed to say that under your breath.
I'm supposed to say that under my breath, but it's true. And so I'm so glad that Driscoll's is on this panel. We need to have more forums where the business community and the immigration community are talking to each other, because one of the challenges politically in the United States is that we're hearing a lot about temporary work programs. Temporary work programs are very, very controversial in the United States because people who are advocates for immigrants inherently believe that any temporary program is going to be exploitative. The labor unions hate them. So there's ingrained opposition to temporary programs. And yet, for the business community and for many migrants, temporary programs are the perfect solution, because they're looking at seasonal workforce, or they're looking to hire somebody for a period of time. For the individual, they can work and they can send money back and then go home and enjoy the fruits of their labor in their home country, where that dollar will go a lot further. It's not everybody, as you said, but it's enough that if we could expand those pathways and do it in a way that ensures that both the migrants and the US workers are protected, and there's ways to do that, then that is a very viable thing. But that clash that has existed for all of the 30 years I've been doing immigration still remains as a very fraught political issue in the United States when it comes to talking about immigration as labor pathways. I think the opening, and it's probably a bigger opening than I've seen in those 30 years, is as a way to manage migration at the border. That connection has, anybody whose job it has ever been to manage the border actually understands that connection, including secretaries of Homeland Security, including former CBP commissioners that I've worked for. They understand that connection. More legal visas would probably mean less people trying to come into the border without status. And yet, the urgency of dealing with the border right now has opened space for that conversation, I think, in a way that it hasn't before. So to try to put a little bit of brightness into the discussion, I think there are opportunities there, but we have to overcome a lot of ingrained positions among different stakeholders that have been around this game in the United States many, many times, not just the politicians, but the labor unions, immigration advocates, business folks who have had, have tried to work on this for a lot of years and have positions that have been glacialized in some ways. So we need to find new ways to talk about it. I think the other thing that is really important is, we need to get the business community to not be afraid to say labor mobility means visas, it means immigration. Get in the debate. Trying to hide behind euphemisms. I remember very strongly I worked at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, sitting in meetings with chamber members who said, well, can we talk about it as trade? I'm like, do you think trade is less controversial than immigration in the United States? Where have you been? It's not. But also, it's not going to fool anybody. People are going to figure this out. So engage, just get in the game and talk about the needs of the business community for regularized pathways, dedicated workforce, commitment. As somebody said on a panel earlier, companies could put skin in the game. Driscoll's, I'm sure, was an important part of vouching for these workers to get their visas and say, we will make sure that they abide by the terms of the visa. You're putting skin in the game. Companies need to be willing to do that in more tangible ways, I think, as well. So I think all of those are opportunities to re-engage and shift the debate. The politics are going to be what the politics are, but the politics can only change if the people who are engaging in the politics change the way we look at it.
Thank you, Teresa. Raphael, last reflection, then we're going to see if we have time for one or two comments from the audience.
Andrew, I would say there's a lot of legal paths for Mexicans. Still, about a quarter of a million coming legally every day, but that could span 3 times. There's enough jobs for them.
Well, indeed, more, because actually, there's temporary workers, and then there's about 3 to 50 to 400,000 temporary workers. But there's a lot of Mexicans who come through family visas, right? Because of the deep ties, family ties that exist.
Years close to 200,000. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
That's Well,
so we tried adding this Ariel, and I tried to add it. Just since I think it's interesting to describe. There's probably about 500,000 Mexicans that come legally every year to the United States. We didn't realize how, and then you add in TN visas, and you add in a few intercompany transfers. The numbers get surprisingly large, actually. So go ahead.
That's a very good point, and thank you for clarifying that, Andrew.
Yeah.
But we badly need to open more for Central Americans.
Right.
Yes.
And we have to face that there's fallen countries, fallen states in our hemisphere.
Yeah.
Venezuela, Haiti, Ecuador is close to it. So we got to be very attentive to that. So that should be part of this regional effort, because it's and then I'm pessimistic, Andrew, because let's face it, the Republican Party in the U.S. has become more to the right than even the National Front in France, which, by the way, now it's pro-immigration. So it's very hard to deal in this U.S. political environment, because immigration has become very toxic. So let's face it, whatever happens, next November 5th, we're going to have a lot of enforcement. Because yes, these last 4 years, there's a lot of people coming into the U.S. That is, Kamala has said so, and so we'll see. But this is going to be we're all talking about the 2026 revision of NAFTA. It seems to me that if we don't solve this issue, we won't get where we have to go. So let's face it, there's a problem here. The entire world is trying to come to the U.S. through our border, and every time that there's a war, then that is mirrored in the U.S.-Mexico border. When Ukraine was invaded by Russia, 1 week after, we were having between 1,000, 1,100 Ukrainians coming in on a daily basis to Tijuana. Suddenly, in May last year, we started to have about 200, 300 people from Turkey coming into Tijuana. Why that? Because there were elections in Turkey. So we must confront that reality and do something meaningful, because Europe has closed, and having the minimum salary in the U.S., the real wages is about $20, $25 an hour in California. Who doesn't want to come to California? So it's we must face this reality, these complicated political realities of the U.S. and do something meaningful, because there's a lot to gain. The U.S. economy wouldn't be where it is without all of these migrants coming into the U.S.
Can I just say another thing
Very
about
briefly,
the
'cause
debate?
we're to-
Yeah, debate in the United States. For years and years and years, we had this idea that the way that we could get immigration reform done in the United States was to deal with three issues all at the same time. We would deal with the border. We would deal with legalizing the status of what was predominantly a Mexican undocumented population in the United States, and we would reform our legal immigration system when we do it all together. That idea has gone completely out the window. Then it became, well, we can trade off legalization for border security, and the legal immigration conversation went out the window. I think things have turned in the last 5 months. So that now we're saying, well, we need to have a border conversation, and that conversation has to take place kind of on its own. But if you look at what the Senate did with the bipartisan bill that was negotiated on the border, the additional pieces that were added to kind of help Democrats, frankly, get on board were legal immigration reforms, additional green cards, farm worker bills. I mean, it wasn't the legalization. There were small pieces there, but the bulk of it was legal immigration reform. I think that is, again, the opening. And I'm sorry to say for the undocumented people who have been waiting a very long time to regularize their status, politically right now, they're last in the queue. And I think, but it's also true that if we reform our legal immigration system, there would probably be more pathways for the undocumented to get visas.
In fact, maybe a more creative way to get at.
Yes, than a
pathways
straight
for the
legalization, we create openings
Yeah.
that will allow people to get from the undocumented status into new legal pathways that we create. One of the things to understand about the Biden administration is that they came in with a lot of really progressive immigration ideas, but Biden himself is a labor guy from way, way back. And so the most recent regulations you've seen on H-2A and H-2B visas are much more restrictive. I think the employers have been, well, there's been lawsuits over the H-2A regulations. But that was driven a lot by labor unions and by the immigrant rights advocates who have some legitimate gripes about how the H-2A program has worked. That's one of the reasons why this negotiated bill, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, is a better way to deal with this. But in the absence of that, we've seen administrations of both parties try to push through regulations. Obviously, the generalized positions of the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate on immigration are drastically different, as Rafa has correctly said. However, I think it's the politics of the issue are complex for both parties. They're complex for the Democrats too. And so I think it's not entirely clear that if the Democrats win, yay, we're going to get a lot of new immigration done. I don't think that's true, in part because Congress we're going to have a divided government. I think that much is clear. I can't tell you who's going to win the White House. I can't tell you who's going to win which of the House or the Senate, but most of the political scientists, people who are looking at this, the highest certainty is divided government. Whoever wins the White House, at least one House of Congress will be of a different party, and that's going to create legislative blockades. On the USMCA negotiation, it was a blessing that the USMCA did not touch the NAFTA visa sections, that the countries agreed, we're just going to leave that alone. It will remain as it was, because if that had been opened up, it would have been a huge kettle of fish. I'm not so certain, again, this will depend a lot on who wins in November in the United States, that will remain. I will tell you that the history of, since NAFTA was enacted and since those provisions were enacted into US immigration law, so they are not just negotiated, they're part of our law. There have been several efforts to try to update the TN list of occupations, for example. The problem lies in that the same disagreements domestically in the United States between labor unions and business on policy exists that create tensions anytime you try to open up a different avenue of immigration. But also there are very big differences between the three governments in what they would like to see on that list. And when you have very big divergences, it's hard because all three countries have to agree on any changes to that list. And then domestic politics kick in, and we have to adapt it into our law as well. So I would say that gives me agita, thinking that we would trilaterally renegotiate those visa provisions in the USMCA.
No, the one
it's not like we
chance
don't have enough
actually
other things to worry about in USMCA.
is actually how you stretch what already exists, and there is some room to stretch. Rafael or Dana, do you have a final 30-second comment?
Yeah, Andrew, I would say Mexico must finally come up with an immigration policy. We don't have one.
Yes.
But more than that, we badly need to strengthen our institutions. An example, in the Mexican consulate in San Diego, there were 3 people dealing with migration, and now there's only 2. At the same time, I was asking Jewish Community Services, which is a great NGO in San Diego. In the last 5 years, they were 40 people, now they're 400 people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Mexico needs institutions. Mexico needs to think about what we want, because people is coming here, they stay. You're absolutely right, and ACNUR, ACNUR is helping us a lot. But then our institution continues to be the same. We cannot rely on the U.S. institutions or on international institutions. We should cooperate with you to have our own institutions, because otherwise it's going to be chaos.
And Mexico should do that for its own self-interest, but if not for that, its own self-interest in the bilateral relationship. I mean, it should be for other reasons too, but this point Teresa made, sometimes migration management trumps things. Dana, you're going to jump in.
From my side, one last comment, and I think not just in this panel, but many other panels, we've established the argument for expanding regular pathways. And in parallel, we need to look at the many other challenges that individuals who do in a regular manner go to Canada, the US, more and more to Mexico, the challenges they're facing, opening bank accounts, xenophobia, accessing services. All of this we need to also tackle in parallel, because it's going to be a much easier sell if there's an easier integration of these people in their countries of destination, if that's the idea, if it's not the circular migration. So let's also look at all of these topics that are on the periphery to be able to tackle them, not just expanding legal pathways.
It's not just the legal frameworks. Mary, do you have a final last word?
No, just saying that the pilot project was very successful, but of course it was extremely costly. So regarding business, we need to, one is the regular pathway, but then is what happened with the visa, and so referring to what Rafael was saying, finding ways in Mexico, but also in the US, helping that part, that part of the corridor. It's also really important because the costs are extremely high. And so if we want to have something from North America, we need to think like all countries together and everybody together on all the points. Also, Diana was saying bank account, social security, etc., etc. So there is a lot of points around this successful project pilot that we really need to take in account if we want to expand it.
That's a great way to end this panel. Thank you very much for everyone who joined.